And we're back. Neal Isaacs, the Raleigh business broker, another old school video about doing deals. These videos are for buyers of businesses, for business owners considering the sale, and maybe some advisors out there that are helping business owners go through these entrepreneurial journeys. I am Neal Isaacs. I sell other people's businesses. I put a lot of content out on this channel, on the interwebs, on this topic, just because I live and breathe small business transactions, lower middle market transactions. And this is the stuff I find interesting. And this is the stuff I'm amazed that other people don't know. So I just want to share it. And if it helps just one person, then I consider it a success. Today's topic is about who does what in a deal, right? So you have all these people, I call them stakeholders. Starts with a business owner that wants to sell, and then a buyer comes in, and a bunch of stuff has to happen. A lot of documents have to go down. And the question becomes, who does what in a deal? We have owners ask us all the time, do I need a lawyer? Yes, you do need an attorney, but they may not have to do as much as your buyer's attorney does. Do I need an accountant? You already have an accountant, but they may do different stuff. And what does that darn broker do? So I'm gonna attack those things, those deliverables, by who does what in a deal in this video. Let's get started, shall we? So the number one thing that I'll start with is buy side's attorney. What does the attorney of the buyer, what are they supposed to do? And I'll preface this, but anybody can do anything, but this is what is, I'll call it standard. That's the crazy thing about business deals, is nothing is that standard like a real estate deal where everything fits in a little box. There's less order to business deals. But what we see a lot, and what makes sense a lot, is that the business buyer proffers an offer. The business buyer says, I will buy your business, Mr. Business Owner, and here's how I want to buy it. So it's on the buyer to put together the definitive documents. I want to define that by saying, well, the first thing that a buyer throws out typically is not the definitive documents. Definitive documents being a definitive stock agreement, or stock purchase agreement, or a asset purchase agreement. SAPA, SPA, those are the words you hear a lot about. This is like the holy grail of our deal, and everything else is built around those. You don't start with that. Definitely need an attorney to craft those. And it's probably going to be the buyer's attorney that does that. That's why it costs the buyer a little bit more in legal fees to generate those documents. But typically it starts with an offer to purchase. Hey, Mr. Business Owner, I want to buy your business. Would you take this? I don't want to go and spend the money on an attorney if you're going to say no. So here's a letter, or here's a promise on a piece of paper. If I paid you this, would you accept it? This is how I'd pay you. This is when I'd pay you. All that stuff, the buyer can do him or herself in a non-definitive format. It's basically just, what do you think, Mr. Seller? Would this work for you? The non-binding agreements, the non-definitive agreements, the buyer, him or herself, could do. The seller should not be writing the offer for the buyer, right? So it's buy side's responsibility for the offer letter, the term sheet. These are all the non-definitive things. And then when it's agreed upon by the sellers, it goes down this path. The definitive agreement should be done by the buy side attorney. The sell side attorney can write it, but typically the buyer is offering the purchase, so they offer the definitive agreement, right? And their attorney can help them write that. Now, what would the seller's attorney do? Well, they're going to review the definitive agreement. They're going to advise the seller's attorney, say, hey, the buyer sent this over through their attorney. Is this in your best interest, Mr. Seller? Is it what we agreed upon with the offer that we talked about? By the time the definitive agreement comes out, hopefully the buyer and seller have been talking a lot. And the seller's attorney is just making sure, yeah, there's no gotchas in here. There's no surprises. This is the right price. I understand they need financing, whatever the contingencies are, and the representations and warranties. Now we're getting into the nuts and bolts of the definitive agreement. The seller's attorney's role should be to help the seller, the business owner, understand what they're agreeing to, right? So a definitive agreement is a binding document. It's saying, yes, I am legally bound to sell and I'm legally bound to buy. So the clause are out a little bit, and you definitely want attorneys involved. The buy side proffers the offer, the sell side reviews the offer with the seller. That's what attorneys do in a business deal. That's their primary role to paper to make it official, the deal. How about the accountants? What do the accountants do? Well, now we've got a situation where buyer and owner are agreeing to buy and sell something. And I'll just use $1 million as a price. Buyer and seller agree to do a deal for $1 million. Well, what are they buying and selling? Now we're getting into the realm of the asset allocation. This defines, for tax purposes, what is being sold. A lot of brokers don't get into the asset allocation, and I've seen language in contracts to just say, hey, before the next time these buyer and owner have to file a tax return, they're going to agree on what they bought and sold in the asset allocation. I wouldn't recommend that. I would recommend including the asset allocation, what buyer and seller will tell the government that was bought and sold in the definitive agreement, right? So it would just say, hey, when tax time comes around, we're going to both tell the IRS, this is what we bought and this is what we sold. An asset allocation sounds like this. $1 million of consideration was transferred. $1 was for the name, and the rest was for the tangible assets, the trucks, the shelves. It could be there's $5,000 of inventory. Whatever it is, it all adds up to $1 million, but we're now classifying what is being bought and sold, and that has tax purposes. We see a lot, savvy buyers will put all of the allocation on the tangible assets in for tax purposes because they want to write that off later. They're buying the business. They want to depreciate the assets they're buying. So it's in the buyer's favor to stack it all on assets instead of non-tangible stuff. They can amortize that. We're getting technical here, but here's my point. Here's my advice to buyers and sellers. It's my opinion, and I think it makes sense, that the seller's accountant should proffer the original asset allocation, and the buyer's accountant, the broker, if there's a broker involved, and I think there should be a broker involved, will intermediate and say, hey, Mr. Buyer, this is what the books of the seller suggest is an appropriate asset allocation. Mr. Buyer, do you agree with said allocation? Buyer can say, no, I want to be able to depreciate more. I want it better for my tax purposes. Buyer and seller's tax situation is diametrically opposed. That's why the asset allocation is so important. But it's my opinion that the seller's accountant should suggest the asset allocation that's appropriate for the books of the then seller's business. It's going to become the business of the buyer, but it starts with the sellers. And so it should start with the seller's CPA. By the way, the business broker should not suggest the asset allocation because we are not accountants. The seller could, but they need to talk with their accountant anyway about what that's going to mean for their taxes. So I think it makes sense for the seller's accountant, ideally a CPA. Sometimes we see the bookkeepers make asset allocation recommendations, but that's where it should come from. Up next, and then the buy side CPA would kind of say, hey, this is how it affects the buyer, and they can ping pong back and forth, and the broker can help to figure out what's appropriate. But you don't want to get all the way to the closing and then say, hey, what do we buy and sell? Starts with the seller's CPA. So we talked about what does the buy side attorney do? What does the sell side attorney do? What does the sell side's CPA do? And then that gets to what the buy side CPAs, if they agree with that. What does the broker do? The intermediary. I'm an intermediary. What am I doing in these deals? Well, based on what you heard from the last few minutes of me talking about this, the word intermediary means go in between. Typically, intermediaries represent the seller of the business. But that doesn't mean we can't serve the business buyer. We can't help the business buyer in service to the business owner, the seller, right? So typically what I'm doing as a business broker and intermediary is I'm guiding this process. Hey, Mr. Seller, we need an asset allocation. What does your CPA think? Hey, Mr. Buyer, where is the APA? Go to your attorney. We're waiting on this. Ball is in your court, buyer or seller, where deals tend to get stuck. And it's because that buyer's attorney is working on the definitive agreement. They got other stuff going on. And the seller's attorney may not be calling the buyer's attorney and saying, I need that APA so I can review it. But the broker should know exactly where both sides are and should help to kind of poke. I'm a professional nudger, and when a deal's stuck, I will nudge and I'll say, ball's in your court, sell side attorney, sell side CPA, buy side attorney, sell side CPA, banker. We didn't talk about bankers. There's things that bankers do as well. So that's where the intermediary comes in. Some call us the quarterback, but we are pushing the deal forward. We are not acting as legal or accounting professionals, but we know when the accountants and the attorneys are needed. And we're making sure that everybody's focused on getting the deal done. If you don't have an intermediary in your deal, chances are you're going to be doing a lot yourself and you may not know who to nudge. And if you're a business owner, you may be focusing too much on your deal and your business may be slowing to a crawl. And you may find yourself stuck if your buyer backs out and your business may be worth less. So the business intermediary is juggling all of these balls, the stakeholders in the deal and the other buyers in the event that the one buyer backs out, pending that definitive agreement, if that's allowed. So as you can tell, I think this stuff is fun. One more thing the intermediary can do on the smaller deals, I mentioned that at the beginning, I was talking about offer letters and stuff. A business broker can help to get a buyer and seller in agreement on the terms. They can't do the legal work, but they can use a form, a fill-in-the-blank form. And this can be a controversial topic, but it's my belief that for small deals, not mergers and acquisitions, but small deals, that a form can be used to get to that stage. Not a definitive agreement, but some type of offer to purchase can be used. So that's another way that a business intermediary can help. Again, we're just getting it to the stage where it makes sense to invest in the deal, hiring attorneys and so forth. But you know, if your buyer and seller are too far apart, why are you going to spend the money on attorneys if the deal's never going to happen? So the broker can help get it to the stage where it's worth investing in the deal. That's all I got for you today. I hope that was interesting to you. It's interesting to me. These are the types of things we talk about on this channel. I am Neal Isaacs. I am the Raleigh business broker. I do talk about deal stuff a lot because I find it interesting. And most of the stuff I'm talking about is stuff that someone raised in a deal. So I'd love to hear what you would like to learn about on this channel. My name is Neal Isaacs, and you can reach me. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can put comments right here. And if it's confidential, then reach out to me directly. Thanks for watching. Until next time, sayonara.